67 years old, and I still check the locks twice before bed. My daughter Renee used to tease me about it when she was a teenager. Dad, you'd hear a possum sneeze in the paddock. She wasn't wrong. 40 years working the early shift at the Port Kembla Steelworks will do that to a man. You learn to sleep light when the machinery never sleeps at all. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I live in a weatherboard house on Macquarie Street in Wollongong, New South Wales. One of those old streets where the jacaranda trees drop purple flowers on the footpath every November, and the neighbors still wave when they reverse out of their driveways. My wife Sandra bought this house in 1991, the year before our youngest was born. She said it had good bones. She was always right about things like that. Sandra passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks, from diagnosis to the end. Not long enough to say everything you mean to say. Never is. So when my phone lit up on a Wednesday night in September at 11:43, and the screen said Cassie calling, I was already awake. Cassie is my oldest. 41 years old, works as a senior fraud investigator with the Australian Federal Police out of the Sydney CBD office. She has never in her adult life called me after 9 o'clock unless something was wrong. Her younger sister Renee calls me at all hours to tell me about sales at David Jones. Cassie is not that kind of person. Cassie is the kind of person who sends a calendar invite before a phone call. I picked up on the second ring. Dad. Her voice was quiet in a way that made my chest tighten. Not upset. Controlled. The specific kind of controlled that people use when they've been practicing what they're going to say for a long time. I'm listening, I said. I need you to do something, and I need you to do it without asking me why. Not yet. All right. Don't go into the study tonight. Don't touch the filing cabinet. And Dad, she paused. Don't mention any of this to Marcus. The room went cold. Marcus Holt. My son-in-law. Renee's husband of 7 years. The man who had been staying in my spare room for the past 5 nights because, he told me, there was a burst pipe at their place in Fairy Meadow, and the insurance assessor was taking forever, and it was just easier to stay at mine for a few days. I'd said, of course. I'd made him a lamb roast on Sunday. I'd lent him my good fishing rod on Monday morning. Cassie, I said quietly, you're frightening me. Good, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly at the edges. Stay frightened. Stay quiet. And please, Dad, just stay away from the study. She hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. Outside, a car moved slowly down Macquarie Street. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Down the hallway, behind the closed door of my spare room, Marcus Holt was asleep. Or so I thought. I want to tell you what kind of man Marcus Holt appeared to be, because it matters for understanding how this all worked. He was 53 years old, slim, silver-haired, the kind of man who always had the right shoes for the occasion. He'd been a commercial property broker for 20 years, and he was good at it. The way certain people are good at things that require you to tell people what they want to hear. He had a handshake you trusted and a smile that arrived just fast enough to feel genuine. When he first started coming around for Sunday dinners, Sandra had said he reminded her of a salesman who'd read one too many books about being likable. I'd laughed it off. I shouldn't have. He and Renee had married in 2017, here in Wollongong, at a small ceremony at the Botanic Garden. Sandra was already sick by then, but she made it to the ceremony. She sat in the front row in a yellow dress, and she smiled all the way through. That's the last photo I have of her looking completely like herself. I lay back down on the bed, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, and I did what I always do when I can't sleep. I thought about Sandra, and then, around 2 in the morning, I heard movement in the hallway. My study is at the end of the hall. Small room, mostly bookshelves. Sandra's old sewing table in the corner that I've never had the heart to move. The filing cabinet sits along the wall opposite the window. 4 drawers, labeled in my handwriting. Household. Insurance. Legal. Important. I didn't get up. I just listened. Footsteps on the old floorboards. The particular creak of the third board from the study door. The one I've been meaning to fix for 6 years. Then quiet. It lasted about 20 minutes. Then footsteps back, the spare room door closing softly. I didn't move. I lay there in the dark, and I thought about what Cassie had said. Don't touch the filing cabinet. Don't mention this to Marcus. And I thought about what was in the filing cabinet. In the drawer labeled important, the copy of Sandra's will, the life insurance documents, the title deed to this house. I thought, how long has this been going on? At 5:30, I got a text from Cassie. One line. Side gate. 5 minutes. Don't wake him. I put on my work boots and my old Illawarra Steelworks jacket, and I slipped out the side gate like a man who had completely lost the plot of his own life. Cassie's car was parked 2 houses down under the paper barks. A dark blue Subaru with a cracked rear bumper she keeps saying she'll get fixed. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. Which I would later learn was accurate. She was in plain clothes. No AFP lanyard. Just my daughter in the early morning, with shadows under her eyes, and a folder on the passenger seat thick enough to prop up a table leg. I got in the passenger side and looked at her. I made that man a lamb roast, I said. She blinked. What? I lent him my fishing rod, Cassie. I drove him to the bottle shop on Tuesday because his car was in for a service. Something moved across her face. Not a smile. The ghost of one. I know, Dad. You could have told me sooner. I couldn't. She said it the way you say something when you've rehearsed the answer and it still doesn't feel like enough. Not until we had the documents. Not until he made his move. If I'd told you earlier, you would have told Renee. I started to say that wasn't true. And then I stopped. Because it was absolutely true. She talked for the next 40 minutes. I did not interrupt her once. For those of you who know what it is to sit very still while someone dismantles everything you thought you understood about your own family, you'll know that 40 minutes can feel like a long time to hold yourself together. It started, as so many things do, with money. Sandra's estate had not been large by any measure. The house, which we'd paid off by 2009, a superannuation account she'd built carefully over 30 years of part-time bookkeeping for the dental practice on Crown Street, a life insurance policy she'd taken out in 1998 and never let lapse, not even during the lean years when I was on reduced hours and we were eating a lot of pasta. Combined, the estate came to somewhere just north of $600,000. Not a fortune, but enough for somebody to want more of it than they were entitled to. Sandra's will, the one she and I had signed together in a solicitor's office in Crown Street in 2014, when her diagnosis first came, divided the estate in 3 equal parts. 1/3 to me, 1/3 to Cassie, 1/3 to Renee, with a separate provision of $20,000 to go to her sister Patricia in Canberra, because Sandra had always made sure Patricia was looked after and she wasn't about to stop at the end. That had been the will. That was the will I believed had been used to settle the estate in 2021. It was not the only version of the will that existed. What Marcus had done, and Cassie explained this with the flat precision of someone who has been carrying this knowledge for months and learned to hold it without flinching, was locate a paralegal at the firm that had managed Sandra's estate. A young man who had been in significant financial difficulty. Marcus had paid him $30,000 in cash across 3 transactions that routed through a private account in Singapore to swap a single document before filing. 1 page, the beneficiary schedule, the page that said how much each person received. On the altered version, Cassie's share had been reduced to $15,000, a token, an afterthought. The remainder of what should have been her inheritance had been folded into Renee's portion. And because Marcus and Renee had a joint account for household expenses, and because the estate transfer went through during a period when Renee was dealing with a complicated pregnancy, and trusted her husband to handle the administrative side. The money had passed through and settled, and been absorbed into Marcus's business accounts before anyone looked closely enough to ask a question. He'd stolen from my daughter, I said. From Cassie. Yes. While attending the estate settlement meetings. Yes. While coming to Sunday dinners. Cassie looked at the window. Yes, Dad. I sat with that for a moment. I want to tell you I handled it with dignity. I mostly handled it by looking at my hands and breathing very slowly and thinking about the fishing rod. But there was more. And the more was worse. Marcus had not simply stolen the inheritance. He had spent the following 3 years ensuring that Cassie would be unable to professionally investigate him. Cassie's work with the AFP involved financial crime. It had, at one point, brought her into proximity with an investigation that touched on a property syndicate in which Marcus held a silent stake. Marcus had learned about this and had used a contact inside a private legal firm to file a professional conduct complaint against Cassie. The complaint was anonymous. It was based on fabricated evidence of a conflict of interest. It had taken 14 months to resolve, and during that time Cassie had been stood aside from that particular investigation, reassigned to a different unit, and spent considerable personal resources defending her reputation. She'd known, she told me, that the complaint had come from somewhere close. She just hadn't been able to prove it until a former associate of Marcus's contacted her 7 months ago and provided documents. Why didn't you tell me then? I asked. 7 months ago. Because you would have gone to Renee, she said again. And Renee would have gone to Marcus. And Marcus would have moved the money somewhere we couldn't follow it. He's been shifting assets for 18 months, Dad. We've been watching the accounts. We needed him to feel safe. We needed him to not know the walls were closing. You used my house as a waiting room, I said. She almost smiled at that. We used his sense of security as a trap. Your house was just where his sense of security decided to stay for the week. I looked out the windscreen at the jacaranda tree in my front yard. The sun was just starting to come up over the escarpment. Purple flowers on the footpath. Sandra had loved that tree. What happens now? I asked. Cassie reached into the folder between us and pulled out a printed email. She held it toward me, and I read it in the early morning light. It was a confirmation for a charity gala dinner. Saturday, September the 16th. The Wollongong Surf House, 6:30 p.m. Dress, cocktail, hosts. The Illawarra Business Foundation. Among the confirmed attendees, Marcus and Renee Holt. Table 7. Marcus is receiving an award, Cassie said. The foundation gives out a Regional Business Excellence Award every year. He's been nominated. He's been telling Renee about it for weeks. She's bought a new dress. I looked at my daughter. You're going to arrest him there. She took the paper back, slid it into the folder with the care of someone handling something that matters. We're going to let him collect his award, she said. And then we end it. I nodded slowly. I looked back at my house. My front door. The pot of lavender Sandra, planted by the steps in 2016, that I've kept alive by sheer stubbornness ever since. Patricia, I said. Sandra's sister. Does she know? Cassie was quiet for a beat too long. Patricia has known for 4 months, she said. She kept copies of some of Mum's original estate correspondence. Details about the beneficiary schedule that we couldn't recover from the paper trail alone. She flew down to Sydney twice to help us verify documents. She didn't tell you because I asked her not to. I thought about Patricia. 70 years old, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who remembered every birthday and never forgot a wrong done to someone she loved. Sandra had always said Patricia would outlast everyone simply out of sheer determination. She's going to be at the dinner, isn't she? Cassie looked at me sideways. She flew in yesterday afternoon. I exhaled through my nose. Your mother, I said. She knew, didn't she? About Marcus. Something about him. Cassie was quiet for a long time. Get some sleep, Dad, she said finally. Saturday is going to be a long night. I got out of the car and stood on the footpath in my steelworks jacket in the September morning. I looked back through the window at my daughter. She knew. I said again. Cassie put the Subaru into gear. "Go inside, Dad." She pulled away before I could ask again. And I think that was its own kind of answer. I walked back through the side gate, past the lavender pot, and stood in my kitchen. Down the hall, in my spare room, Marcus Holt was asleep. For 2 more days. Saturday morning I woke at 6 and made myself a proper breakfast. And toast, strong tea, the way my mother taught me. Sandra used to say, I made the worst tea in the Southern Hemisphere. She made it for me every morning for 31 years anyway. Marcus came downstairs at 7:15 looking rested and unbothered, the way a man looks when he believes he has already won. He asked if there was any tea on. I smiled and poured him a cup. "Big night tonight," he said, settling at my kitchen table with his phone. The table Sandra picked out from a second-hand shop in Corrimal in 1994. He scrolled with the loose ease of a man who had no idea the world was about to rearrange itself around him. "The foundation dinner," I said. "Should be a good one." He looked up. "Renee's really excited. You should come, you know. Family's always welcome at these things." I turned from the bench and met his eyes. "I would not miss it," I said. Something moved across his face. Very brief. Like a man who heard a sound he recognized but didn't expect. Then the smile came back. "All assembled. All shine. Good on you," he said. "Should be a great night." Great was certainly one word for it. The surf house sat on the foreshore at Wollongong Beach. All glass and dark timber with the Pacific Ocean as wallpaper. The kind of venue that made ordinary events feel significant, and significant events feel cinematic. When I arrived at 6 o'clock, the room was already filling. Round tables with white linens, small candles, the low warm noise of people who believed this was simply a Friday evening fundraiser. I found my seat at table 9, 2 tables back from the stage. Cassie had told me to arrive early. I ordered a sparkling water, and I waited. Patricia arrived at 6:15 in a dark green jacket, and the expression of a woman who had been waiting years to put something down and was about 3 hours away from being able to do it. She spotted me across the room, came over, and sat down without ceremony. She reached over and put her hand briefly on mine. "You right?" she asked. "Ask me in a couple of hours," I said. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Sandra would have been here 3 hours ago with a floor plan and a briefing document." "Sandra," I said, "would have had the MC bribed and the award prearranged." That got a real smile. Brief. True. The rest of the table filled in around us. A couple I recognized from the Rotary Club. A local architect, whose name I always forgot. The foundation president, a cheerful man named Trevor who seemed to have no idea what was about to happen at his event, which I found oddly touching. Renee and Marcus arrived at 6:40. Renee was in a dark red dress that looked beautiful on her. She was laughing at something Marcus said as they walked in. And when she saw me, she broke into a full smile and came over and hugged me hard. "Dad, you came!" "I didn't know you were coming. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about," I said. She looked happy. That was the part that sat heaviest in my chest. She looked genuinely, easily happy, the way you look when you believe the version of your life that you've been shown. My younger daughter, my Sandra's daughter, standing there in her new dress at her husband's award dinner with no idea at all. That part, I had known, was going to be the hardest part. It was. Marcus worked the room the way certain men work rooms. He was good at it. Unhurried handshakes, the right questions, the easy laugh that arrived at precisely the right moment. He stopped at every table, said the right thing to every person, and by the time the entrees arrived, he had the room feeling like he'd personally invited each of them. I watched him from 2 tables away, and I thought about the lamb roast and the fishing rod, and the Sunday dinners and the years. And I kept my face very still. He caught my eye once from across the room, raised his glass slightly in my direction. I raised mine back. Enjoy the entree, I thought. The entree came and went. The bread rolls. The speeches from the foundation board. Trevor announced that the Business Excellence Award would be presented after the main course, and there was a round of polite applause, and Marcus put his hand briefly over Renee's on the tablecloth, and she smiled at him. Patricia, beside me, had gone very still. My phone buzzed once under the table. A text from Cassie. 2 words. 3 minutes. I turned my phone face down, picked up my water glass, took a slow breath, counted the jacarandas I could see through the glass wall facing the street. There were none. But it helped to look. The main course arrived. Marcus was mid-sentence at his table. Something about a development project on the escarpment. The kind of story that was really a net worth announcement in narrative clothing. When the main doors of the surf house opened, Cassie walked in. She was in a dark suit. 2 AFP officers behind her in plain clothes, both wearing the particular expression of people who are about to do something precise and unpleasant, and have accepted that fact completely. They walk through the restaurant the way certain people walk through spaces, not hurriedly, not theatrically, with the kind of absolute calm that is itself a kind of announcement. The room didn't stop all at once. It slowed. Table by table, the way a conversation drains out of a space when the air pressure changes. Renee saw Cassie first. Her face opened up. Cass? Oh, I didn't know. What are you? And then she saw the 2 people behind her sister, and her voice tapered off the way a radio tapers when the signal drops. Cassie walked the full length of the dining room without looking at anyone but Marcus. Marcus turned around slowly. He had the expression of a man who had been hearing a particular sound in the background for a long time and had finally placed it. The composed man. The easy laugh. The handshake you trusted. He looked at my daughter, and for one full, unguarded second, one entirely honest and very expensive second, I watched 7 years of carefully maintained performance leave his face completely. Just for a second. Then it came back. Not all of it, but enough. There's the real one, I thought. There you are. Cassie stopped at his table. She looked at Marcus Holt with the patience of a woman who had been working toward this moment for years and was in no hurry whatsoever now that it had arrived. Marcus David Holt, she said. Her voice was flat and clear, and it carried. You are under arrest for fraud, obtaining financial advantage by deception, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. The table went to stone. You have the right to remain silent. What is this? Marcus said. He had found something. Not all of his composure. A layer of it. Enough to speak with. This is a private function. This is an award dinner. Cassie, we're family. I have the original beneficiary schedule, Cassie said. The version filed before substitution. I have financial records linking you to 3 payments made to a former employee of Carrington Legal Services between August and October 2021. I have a statutory declaration from that individual, signed 6 weeks ago, detailing every transaction. I have 8 months of asset movement records, and I have testimony from a former business associate who is currently cooperating with federal investigators in Sydney. Marcus's mouth opened. Nothing came out. I also have, Cassie said, and her voice dropped just slightly. The complaint documents you had prepared against me in 2022. The ones your solicitor filed anonymously. The ones that cost me 14 months of my career. We traced the originating instructions 3 weeks ago. The officer behind Cassie stepped around with a pair of handcuffs, and Marcus Holt stood up from Table 7 of the Illawarra Business Foundation Gala dinner, at the venue where he had expected to collect an award. And he stood up, and he looked across the room. At me, not at Cassie. Not at the officers. At me. Like a man who had just finished a very long equation and arrived at an answer he should have seen coming, I held his gaze. I did not look away. I did not say a word. I just held it. Steady and level. And I let him read whatever he needed to read in it. You sat at my table, I thought. You drank my tea. You ate my wife's good lamb recipe that I made for you because I thought you were family. You slept in my spare room and smiled at me across the breakfast table and talked about footy and the weather. And all the while, you had taken something that belonged to my daughter, something Sandra had worked 30 years to leave her. You looked me in the eye every single time, and you never flinched. I was not the one who should have been flinching. The handcuffs clicked. Trevor from the foundation made a sound like a man who had lost track of which decade he was in. The Rotary Club couple at my table pushed back slightly from the tablecloth. Renee had not moved. She was sitting very still in her dark red dress with both hands flat in her lap and her eyes on the tablecloth in front of her, and her face was doing something I did not have a name for and did not want to look at for too long. That part I had known was coming. I had not known it would feel quite like this. The officers walked Marcus toward the door. He didn't fight. The composure was back. Just enough. Just a film of it. And somehow, that was the most honest thing about him. Even at the end, the performance didn't entirely stop. At the door, he turned back once. He looked at Renee. She looked at the tablecloth. He walked out. The room held its breath for what felt like a full minute but was probably 30 seconds. Then, somewhere across the dining room, a fork touched a plate. A chair moved. Trevor cleared his throat. The world remembered what it was doing. Cassie came back to the table and sat down in Marcus's vacant chair. She looked at her sister. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you." Renee looked up. Her eyes were dry. She was Sandra's daughter all the way down. "How long?" she said. 7 years building it, Cassie said. 7 months knowing enough to move. Renee looked at the table. The will. Yes. Mum's real numbers. Yes. Renee was quiet for a moment. She made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. Something in between. Brief and private. Like something letting go. Then she looked down the table at Patricia. Patricia looked back at her. And something passed between them. A full conversation in a single look. The kind that women who have known each other their whole lives can hold without a word. Then Renee looked at me. Just me. "Dad," she said. Her voice broke on exactly that word, and no others. I got up from my chair, walked around the table, and put my arms around her the way I had when she was 9 years old, and frightened of the thunderstorms that came off the escarpment in February. She held on with both hands. Her shoulders shook once, twice, and then went still. "I've got you," I said. "I've always got you." She pulled back, straightened up, wiped her eyes with the white linen napkin, and looked at the untouched main course in front of her. "Is the fish good here?" she asked. "What?" "The fish. I ordered the barramundi. I've never eaten here, and I'd like to eat something." I blinked. I looked at Cassie, who was already flagging the waiter. I looked at Patricia, who was picking up her fork with the satisfied expression of a woman who had waited years for this meal. And we ate. 3 weeks later, I came downstairs on a Tuesday morning and made myself a cup of tea. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the jacaranda tree in the front yard. The September bloom was fading, purple flowers still on the footpath but going brown at the edges. The kind of morning that feels like the end of something and the beginning of something else at exactly the same time. On the bench was a green folder. Sandra's handwriting on the tab. Important. I'd moved it up from the filing cabinet the night before. Set it there so I'd see it in the morning. Inside was the corrected beneficiary schedule. Certified, refiled, legally restored. Cassie's name where it had always belonged. The numbers Sandra had actually intended. The version where my daughter wasn't erased. The version where nobody had rewritten Sandra's choices while she was too sick to defend them. I put my hand flat on the folder. "We got him, Sandy," I said. To the kitchen. To the lavender plant by the door. To the cross-stitch she'd hung above the window the year we moved in. Home is where your story begins. I used to think that was just something they printed on tea towels. Now I think she knew something I didn't. Took us longer than it should have. But we got him. The kettle finished. Outside, the first lorikeet of the morning hit the grevillea in next door's yard and made more noise than anything that size should reasonably make. I poured my tea. And for the first time in a long time, it tasted exactly like it was supposed to. There are people in this world who treat trust as a resource to be extracted. They find the gaps between what you know and what you assume. They sit at your table and learn your routines and use your faith in them as a tool. And they are very good at it. Because the best of them never look like what they are. They look like family. But here is what I have learned. Patience outlasts cunning. Evidence outlasts charm. And love, the real kind, the kind that keeps a plant alive for 4 years out of stubbornness. The kind that files documents carefully in green folders and remembers every number on every page, that love outlasts everything. Sandra always said the truth had a way of settling. Like sediment in still water. You just had to wait long enough for the surface to go quiet. She was right. She was always right about things like that. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment below and let us know. Every word you share keeps these stories coming. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Whispered Truths. There are more stories here. And every single one of them matters.